Okay, so I'm going to call this a part two to my previous video on the issue of, let's say, self-censorship in this country, or caution in this country. Now, some of you may think it's a little reckless even making this video, but at the risk of sounding paranoid, I've checked the four corners of the room. There's no bugging, there's no, nothing that can be used against me. I'm speaking in English, and there's a very, very little chance that the neighbours I have here will have a working comprehension of the sort of English that I'm talking about at this sort of level. And the walls are relatively thick. But I have to get it off my chest. I have to say how I'm feeling right now, and if that's a risk, so be it. I've just had a chat with a friend, and she had actually seen the message that I'd written. If you'd seen my previous video, you'll know this is referring to a post that I put on QQ, which is a Chinese social networking site, where basically I had said, and this is almost word for word, there are many things I like about living here, and there are, but the extent of government control and limits on what we can say is not one of them. So it was, I felt, a very balanced post, i.e., it was balancing positive with negative. I was being honest about the negative side of things. Now, I'm not going to dwell too much on the person that I had an exchange with. She's not worth it. But she did threaten me. She made failed threats about what school that I'm working in, and the message was clear. She wanted to find out which school so she could cause problems for me. I deleted the post reluctantly as a precaution, but the whole thing really proved the point I was making, which is that you cannot criticize the government in this country without consequences. And that is I'm not surprised, I'm not at all surprised. I know Chinese history all too well to know the situation here, but um, that doesn't make it any less easy or any. I'll be honest, I had an uneasy few days just thinking about it, maybe overthinking about it, and I was angry about it. I was angry that this person felt the audacity to threaten me over what? Over an opinion that she didn't like. Um, but that's just typical communist behavior, really. Threaten anyone that you don't agree with. And we've been seeing this behavior on beyond China's borders, actually, with the arrogant attitude of Chinese journalists recently. I mentioned the situation in Birmingham with that CCTV journalist and the attitude that the Chinese embassy took. So it's sort of an exported neo-nationalism of we're powerful now, we can do what we want. And I think it's a kind of face thing. This country had great humiliation in the 19th century. We know that. They call it the century of humiliation. So I think in the Chinese mind, the Chinese government mind, this is kind of, oh, we're getting even now. We can do what we want. I think that's their mentality. Um, and yeah, that's the situation. But what I want to talk a little bit about, and I'm going to make this relatively brief for my own sake, is the psychology of this. If you find yourself in my position now, nothing's happened. I'm in no trouble, nothing like that. And I'm not an idiot. I'm not reckless. I'm not going to go into class and say the sort of thing that I said on QZone, even though it was a balanced comment. I'm not going to say anything about politics in class. I've showed them pictures of the UK, like a picture of the Queen and the Prime Minister, but that's not, it's not offering my opinion. It was actually part of famous people. I also showed them Rowan Atkinson and Anthony Joshua, the boxer, and others, just famous British people. So, I would never be reckless in class as to say my opinions of democracy and communism. It just wouldn't do it. Even if the students asked, I'd change the subject or I'd tell them plainly, I can't talk about that. Um, it's too big a risk, especially now. More so, I would say, than 5 years ago when I was last here. But what I would say to any CCP apologists is My experience proves my point. What this woman said was she was attacking me because she wanted to counter the point that I was making, that there is no freedom of speech when it comes to this issue. So she was insisting that there is, and that you can dissent. She then finished her little diatribe by saying that I should be careful, um, and I can't say what I want on Qzone. But this wasn't friendly advice, this was veiled threats. She then wanted to know what school I was in. I had a good mind to tell her to F herself. I didn't say that, but we had a rather heated argument. I particularly found despicable that she insulted my young friend. She said, basically, are you a Chinese? Your parents must be ashamed of you. And she was bringing the nationalism into it. She denied it, but she was. Um, and she just personified the whole ugly nature of this regime. I have zero respect for them. Zero. They have had some big achievements, have lifted millions of people out of poverty, but their control and their cruelty and their utter intolerance for any different point of view, I think is totally disgusting. Not to mention their dishonesty about their own bloody past. But this just brings me to the point here. You know, all those things are true, but really this comes down to how you handle it. And I'm really referring to anyone else who might find themselves in my position. The only way in China to not get depressed about this sort of stuff is to put it to the back of your mind. Now, believe it or not, I don't spend a lot of time thinking about this. In fact, I've only thought a lot more about it since she threatened me. Had she not done so, I would have just made my post and then got on with my day. But because she threatened me, it only reiterated the problem. And my friend advised, when I just had this talk with my friend, she advised that the way to be happy here is to not think about it. And that's true. Most Chinese people just get on with their lives. They don't think about politics because they've got zero influence. Zero. Now, I know what people in the UK will say, oh, but we can't change things either, or I don't like the results of this, I don't like the results of that. There is a massive difference, and the difference is choice. Now, that sounds artificial when I say it like that, but that difference is vast. In a democracy, you might not get the results you want. You know, I'm not a supporter of the Conservative Party, I didn't vote Tory. And there's a lot of things in Britain I do not like. I find deeply frustrating and I would change. But I have the freedom to say that. That's the point, and it is precious. That does not exist in this country, and that is a fundamental difference. So anybody who says there's basically three types of people: those who insist that there is freedom of speech in China in politics, and the three types of people I would say suggest as follows. Number one, liars. That is members of the party who are loyal to the party and they're just lying. They're simply lying because saving face and loyalty to the party is more important than the truth. The second category is people who are perhaps not being honest as well, but it's not because of affection for the party, it's for safety, for precaution. That might be people who have foreign friends and they want to protect their foreign friends, or they want to protect themselves, understandably, because they can't openly talk about these things. So they say that, this is not the case. It's kind of a defensiveness, but they're not bad people. They're just being cautious. Then the third category is those who are very naive. This might be young people who have been brought up on the education system that the Communist Party can do no wrong, and that's, they vilify everything else except the Communist Party, and any appalling things that they've done are dismissed as mistakes. So then they would insist that anything, like I said in the last video, the nationalism is deeply, deeply, deeply entrenched. This is not to say everybody is fanatical, definitely not, but it's just so deeply entrenched. So if you're here and you overthink these things, it can be very unhealthy because you're powerless. Everyone's powerless. At least as outsiders, we can leave after a while. But it's striking. It really is. Because my experience proves what I've said. I made a balanced statement whereby I said there are things that I like. I like many aspects of the culture. I respect the laws, and I do, but I don't like the absolute control that they have. That's enough to get me threatened. So, that just proves that anyone who claims that China is a free country is kidding themselves. It's just not true. It's true insofar as, in another sense, outside the realm of politics, in terms of you have the freedom to say, oh, I don't like that type of food, or oh, that film was rubbish, or I'm not a fan of basketball, something like that. They're all harmless. When it comes to the party, their power is so absolute. I mean, put it this way, if we look at the other totalitarian regimes in history, every country that has experienced those has had some degree of introspection. In Japan, yes, Japan, and I know this is controversial here, but there has been official apologies for wartime atrocities. Now, it's a bit of a inconsistent record, but Prime Minister Nakazone in the 1980s did make formal apologies, and the Japanese constitution was rewritten after the war to be self-defense only. The changes are radical, allowing for the fact that there are nationalist forces within Japan. I would suggest that it's a very, very different country than it was in the 30s. Russia. Now, I'm not a big fan of Russia at the moment, particularly in light of their aggression against my country. I'm not a fan of the Putin regime. But Russia has, to a large extent, introspected about Stalin. Maybe not as much as they could have, but he's not venerated in Russia the way that Mao is in this country, not on the same level. So I would say the Katyn massacre of Polish officers in 1940. I may be wrong about this, but I think the Russian state did acknowledge that was a communist crime, and they blamed Stalin for it, and the NKVD. Cambodia, the killing fields. Khmer Rouge leaders were brought to trial. A lot of them are old men now, so they couldn't stand trial. But the point is, there were trials. Germany, needless to say, it's a crime to deny the Holocaust in Germany and to show any support for Hitler. So, in virtually every other country where there has been totalitarianism, there has been introspection. Not here. Not here. Okay, North Korea, not there either, but yeah, that's one other example. But generally speaking, that's why, in this sense, China's unique, because the same party that is in power today was the same party that under Mao killed millions of people and caused enormous suffering. So when they look back, people know about the Great Leap Forward and the Cultural Revolution. Filmmakers, if they touch on these subjects, they need to wait for years to get approval. So there's a very, very, very long way to go before there's honesty about this, and Mao is still dismissed as simply making mistakes. At best, they say, oh, he was a bit naive at times, and he listened to the Gang of Four. But that's a contradiction because he had absolute power. So you can't, on one hand, say he was a great leader um, who was a revolutionary. Well, was this great man so gullible that he was misled by four people? That's a contradiction because either he's a great man or he's an idiot. Which is it? Um, so the reality is, the Gang of Four were scapegoated. Ultimately, it came down to Mao's choice. But anyway, I'm not going to get into a history lesson. Needless to say, the events of 1989 are completely whitewashed, which is despicable because that's within very recent memory. Recently, Sir Alan Donald, who was British ambassador at that time, passed away, and he had sources at the time suggesting as many as 10,000 may have died. Now the figure will never be known, but um, Yeah. So it's something I can never really reconcile with is the extent of control and the extent of dishonesty that this regime has. Whatever achievements they've had, and they have had big achievements. I acknowledge that. They've lifted millions of people out of poverty. They've brought China from being the poor man of Asia to being the world's second most powerful country. It's a major thing. China is a wonderful, amazing, incredible land. It really is. But if you're a human and you think about politics in any way, you cannot but feel unease at the situation. So the only way to deal with it, if you're like me and you are politically minded, is to put it to the back of your mind. And then, I mean, I'm making this now. I probably won't be able to upload it for months, but it's the only way to put it to the back of your mind and just be cautious. I mean, I thought that on Q Zone it would be relatively safe because as much as they do monitor the internet, I was writing in English. But I didn't reckon on this former acquaintance of mine. Um, I'm still kind of pissed off that she had the audacity to threaten me the way she did. And that she could be so childish. I mean, this is a woman in her 40s, and she was threatening my teenage friend as well as me. Um, what a bitch. But you know, it's just personal. So that's it. If you come here and you're politically minded, for goodness sake, bear in mind that you have to some extent, bury those feelings. You don't have to change them. You don't have to change your views, but just be aware that it's not so much a security thing. I've no real fear that anything's going to happen. It's more for your own sake, so that you don't drive yourself crazy thinking about it. And I hope this has been interesting. Thanks for watching.